Welcome to episode 22 of the Gluttons For Punishment Podcast, or GFP, a Toronto Maple Leafs and NHL podcast hosted by Michael Lepore and Anthony Bruno. He's Lepore, I'm Bruno. Thank you so much for listening and watching us on YouTube as well. If you're a new listener and enjoy the show, we would really appreciate it if you give us a 5-star rating and review on Apple. And if you're watching on YouTube and you enjoy watching us, it would be a big time help if you smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you know exactly when the GFP podcast is dropping some new content. All right. As of Wednesday, June 2nd, 2021, the Toronto Maple Leafs have done it again, everybody. They have done it again, blowing a 3-1 series lead to the Montreal Canadiens. Just when you thought this team was different, that this team was finally going to go on a deep playoff run and prove everybody wrong and win their first playoff series in 17 years, they failed again. And we're going to go over everything that happened, and we're going to break down the series and talk about where the Leafs should go from here moving forward. It is going to be a jam-packed episode, and I promise you don't want to miss this one. So stay tuned, everybody. But before we get into all that, it is time to welcome in my partner in crime, Mr. Michael Lepore. How you doing, man?
You're even going to ask how I'm doing. I'm doing good, Anthony Bruno. It's taken some time, couple night sleeps, or should we say poor night sleeps. But we're here. We signed up for this, so we got to do it. We got to vent our frustrations. Episode 22. Shout out to Rick Vive, one of the 3 Maple Leafs who have had 50-goal seasons. We could have used Rick in Game 7, but we could have used
anyone in Game 7.
Yeah, we could have used some goals in Game 7, but unfortunately, those types of players don't exist anymore. So a lot to talk about, a lot of fun stuff to talk about, and I think a lot of things that will get a lot of people engaged. So let's get at it, brother.
Yeah, man, let's get right into it because, like I said, there is a lot to unpack here. Things were looking great. I mean, the Leafs took a 3-1 series lead without their $11 million captain, without Nick Foligno, and Leaf fans thought the series was done. Habs fans thought the series was done. I mean, basically everyone watching this series at that point thought the series was done. But, I mean, everything that could have gone wrong over those last 3 games went wrong for the Leafs. I mean, credit to the Montreal Canadiens for fighting back in the series and winning 3 straight. But, I mean, it doesn't make this, any more disappointing. I mean, it was just brutal. If you're a Leaf fan, I mean, it was just embarrassing. There's really no other way to put it. I mean, personally, I think it was the most embarrassing collapse in Leafs history. I have this above the Bruins 4-1 collapse in the third period in 2013, and we can get into that maybe a little bit later as well. But I mean, it was awful. But Lepore, let's start here. So just looking at this from a Toronto Maple Leafs perspective. Yeah. Okay. Who's to blame for this collapse? Because, people will look at Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews.
Oh, Mitch.
Who scored just 1 goal combined on 54 shots in this series.
Incredible.
I mean, maybe you're looking to Sheldon Keefe for getting out coached. Maybe you're mad at Kyle Dubas for some of the decisions that he made constructing this roster. But Lepore, give me your thoughts. Who is to blame from a Leafs perspective specifically for this collapse?
Well, in Leafland, we like to have a whipping boy. And historically for the Toronto Maple Leafs, I feel like it's always been a defenseman. There were the years going way back. There was Larry Murphy. And then I'm sure people remember the shit Brian McCabe listened to when he was here. Jake Gardner not too long ago. And different teams seem to have different positions they point to. And it's kind of funny which teams have what positions they point to, and interesting why they go that route. But for the Leafs, historically, it's been a defenseman. The Toronto Maple Leafs have a new whipping boy, and the whipping boy is Mitch Marner. Whether it's deserved or not, he's the one everyone's pointing to. And I'm quick to respond, and not necessarily to defend Mitch, but more just questioning, why is Mitch receiving so much of the blame compared to, say, Austin Matthews? I mean, to me, these guys are a two-headed monster. They're on the same line. When one's firing, typically the other one's firing. So I almost find it difficult to blame one and not the other. But for whatever reasons, and we'll get into the reasons why I think people are creating that narrative, Marner's the guy getting circled. And I think he's at least one of the main figures we can point to in this situation. I mean, you can't ignore it. The kid's body language sucked all series. And I think that is a big thing people, or an excuse people give them to point at one guy. His body language sucked. He couldn't hit the net. I don't know if it's ever been so obvious to me that a player was lacking confidence. It's almost like he was shooting just to shoot. Like he had no confidence in his shot.
You could see it written all over his face.
Even before he was letting it go. You'd be like, I'm just shooting it because I'm in a position, but I kind of know that this is not going to end well. Then just other nightmares throughout the series, the puck over glass penalties. He had the turnover in Game 7. I mean, there was a lot of Leafs turnovers in this series, but when you're the one who has it in Game 7, it's the one that's going to get remembered. So we can make a list, but I think the top of the list has to be Mitch. What do you think, Bruno?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think, there's a lot of ways that you can break down this series, and we're going to get into why the Montreal Canadiens came back and were able to steal this series. But just looking at this from a Leafs point of view, I mean, it really is as simple as Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews not showing up and producing. It really is. Yeah. And I brought up the stat, 1 goal on 54 shots. I mean, that almost defies logic.
0.5%.
How do your star players, after lighting it up the entire regular season, Matthews wins the Rocket Richard, they both finished top 5 in scoring. How do they score 1 goal? You look at the Leafs leading scorers in this series. William Nylander was number 1. Alex Kerfoot was number 2. And Jason Spezza was essentially tied with Austin Matthews as the third leading scorer with 5 points. So, you're not only are you going to have a tough time winning a playoff series, how are you going to make a deep playoff run, period, when your 2 best players aren't performing? And you go look across the NHL, right? I mean, we all like to bring up Colorado because they're a juggernaut, but look at McKinnon and Rantanen and Landeskog. Those guys are absolutely lighting it up. Tampa Bay with Kucherov, Point, and Stamkos, they're producing. Even the Carolina Hurricanes, who are down in their series right now to the Lightning, Sebastian Aho, he had a big first round against the Nashville Predators. Their number 1 center, scoring the clinching series goal. So, I mean, when you look at Matthews and Marner, it's just, it's really, really disappointing. And when you look at Marner specifically now, 0 goals in his last 18 playoff games.
It's crazy.
Crazy. How does that even happen for a player who's that talented? And here's the thing about Mitch Marner. This is a guy, I know there's people questioning the heart of the Leafs. I love how everyone just becomes a heart expert at this time.
I'll stop it there for a second. To me, that's always the laziest take because, you can always just point to that. Why did a team lose? Oh, heart. Okay. Well,
yeah, it's just absolutely ridiculous.
Because you can't respond to something to explain. I always hate that.
Oh, it's just complete trash when people bring that up. And listen, Mitch Marner, he's a guy, you see him throughout the season. He plays in all situations. He plays on the penalty kill. He's willing to block shots. He gets into the dirty areas. For a small guy, he's not afraid to get into those areas. And maybe in this series, I thought that there were times he was overmatched physically. I thought there were times that the Montreal Canadiens came at him. They tried to take some runs at him. It maybe led to those puck over glass penalties, right? There was thoughts probably in the back of his head that if I don't make a decision quickly here, I'm going to be in trouble. Someone's coming and trying to run me over. But for the most part, it's just, it's so tough to watch those two just not step up when the team needed them most, especially when Captain John Tavares missed the entire series.
Good point.
Except for 2 minutes and 53 seconds. So, Yeah, Lepore. I mean, at the end of the day, I have those two right at the top of my list. We can't blame Jack Campbell for this. I know he let in that soft goal to Brendan Gallagher in Game 7. And we can't blame the defense core either, Lepore.
No.
Even the team defense in general. The Leafs allowed just 2 goals per game in this series. They were second behind the Colorado Avalanche in goals against per game.
I saw that. I saw that stat. Yeah,
and even shots against per game. The Leafs were top 3 in shots allowed per game.
Yep.
In the playoffs. So for those of you who want to, bring up that lazy narrative again, like the Leafs, they have too much offense. They need more defense and goaltending. That's simply not what happened. What happened here is that a team that is so good offensively, that was so potent on the offensive side of the puck throughout the entire season, and even going back the last 5 years, in the Matthews era, did not show up when it mattered most. And that's exactly why I have Matthews and Marner at the top of my list.
Yeah, I saw you mentioned the guys for like Colorado and Tampa. I saw the list yesterday morning. McKinnon, 12 points in 5 games. Landeskog, 11 points in 5 games. Kucherov, 12 points in 7 games. Rantanen, 9 points in 5 games. Stamkos, 8 points in 7 games. And Braden Point, 7 points in 7 games. Your best players have to be your best players. And for the Leafs, Matthews and Marner just weren't good enough. And I mean, it's loaded. I mean, I'm sure Montreal Canadiens fans right now are screaming saying, well, we shut them down and Carey Price this and Carey Price that. Yeah. And of course that's part of it. I mean, credit has to be given when players like that aren't performing. I mean, you have to acknowledge the other side, but right now we're just placing blame on the Toronto Maple Leafs players, and they have to be better than that. Like it sounds so overly simplistic, but you can't win if $22 million on your payroll is not performing. And it's funny, I talked to a good friend of mine yesterday who's a big Habs fan, and his take was when the series was 3-1, he thought the scariest part was that Matthews and Marner weren't performing. Like he acknowledged at that point, like we're down 3-1 and we're not even getting lit up by their best players. Like that's how he saw it at that point in the series. So that just goes to show you how this team was able to pull through it at the start, but eventually it's going to run out, man. Like you can't rely on your depth. Like the guys you brought up, you can't rely on Kerfoot and Spezza to keep it going. I mean, at the end of the day, it's very simple. And like, that's how I will remember this series. And that's how I think a lot of Leafs fans will remember this series. Like there's always that one thing, like against the Bruins, it was like, hey, you remembered like the Jake Gardner turnovers, or you remember, Rask outplaying Anderson in Game 7, those things. This series, I think, will be remembered for, first things first, the John Tavares injury, just because what we saw on television. But to me, in 10 years, I'll look back at this series and say, we lost because Matthews and Marner didn't produce. Why? We can talk about all day, but that's the reason why the Toronto Maple Leafs did not win this series.
Yeah, it really is as simple as that. And it's like, I've sat here and I've, tried to come up with, better explanations for everything, Lepore. And listen, I have more thoughts that I'm going to get into later in the podcast, but the more and more I think about it, it really does just boil down to that. As simple as that sounds. And, you could say, well, we need better analysis than that. But honestly, at the end of the day, when your best players are not rising to the occasion when it matters most, and they are scoring 1 goal combined in a 7-game playoff series, you're screwed.
Yeah, you're done.
And I mean, it's just, it really, really is as simple as that. But Lepore, we can get into some other players on the Leaf side of things here, or not players actually. Let's actually get into Kyle Dubas and Sheldon Keefe for a second. Okay. So everybody praised Kyle Dubas this year. Okay. They said he made adjustments in the offseason. He's a guy obviously that is big into analytics. He loves the stats. He loves constructing his roster based on that viewpoint, right? And a lot of people praised him in the offseason for bringing in veteran talent like, Wayne Simmons, power forward, Joe Thornton, experience, Zach Bogosian on the blue line, TJ Brody, which I thought was a phenomenal signing. I thought he had an excellent season, and I thought he was great in the series against Montreal. So after everyone praised him, even the Nick Foligno deal at the trade deadline, which obviously at this point didn't work out because he missed 3 games and was playing injured the rest of the series. And, they traded away a first round pick. So that obviously did not work out. But can we sit here and after everyone, including us, praised Kyle Dubas, can we flip this on Kyle Dubas at all? Like, are people actually justified to blame Kyle Dubas for any of this, Lepore?
No, I don't know. Have you heard any takes from anywhere blaming this on Dubas?
I've seen a couple things on Twitter, believe it or not, from a couple writers that actually called out, like one guy was saying that the Leafs should have stuck with Lou Lamoriello looking back.
Yeah, to do what? Like, that's why we could assign Leo Komarov and Matt Martin to bad contracts. But this team was built a certain way, and then he added at the deadline. What Kyle Dubas did, and we can question some moves in the way of like the personalities. Like maybe we can get to it, like judge the additions this team had, give them grades, like Joe Thornton and Simmons. It's gonna be interesting to see how they're looked at now, like for their tenures in Toronto, because I both think they're done. I'd like to assume both of them are done. But I'd ask people, like, if you were to blame Kyle Dubas, what are you blaming? He has guys who can score, or he's always had guys who can score. The D was a problem. He added to the D. He got better. And as much as people want to point to the D on this team, it's pretty solid. Like, people kind of get stuck in old narratives. I don't know if you saw that article in The Athletic where they interviewed, I think it was 5 NHL executives the day after the Leafs lost to give their opinions on the Leafs as an organization. And you wonder, man, the NHL, there was one of them who trashed the Leafs mindset because he's like, oh, they think they can outscore teams 6-5 and they have to learn how to beat teams 2-1. And I was like, have you even been watching this year? We've been on this podcast screaming about how the Leafs were not putting teams away. Like, they were winning a lot of games 2-1, 3-2, like empty net wins, as opposed to what we were used to, like 6-1, 4-1. Like, no, the Leafs weren't winning like that all year. Like, this guy wasn't paying attention. I really think people are stuck in that old narrative because Kyle Dubas really made this objectively a strong defensive team. And whether it's because of the actual players playing defense or the responsibilities that were gained from the guys playing up front, if I remember correctly, I think this team was 8th in the league in goals against 5-on-5. That's a good number.
I got the stat right here. I have just total goals against per game, Lepore. The Leafs were 7th in the league in goals against per game this season and 5th in shots against per game.
And to me, that's almost a bigger stat. 5th in shots against per game. And we didn't have, with a goal stat anyway, it's not like we were goalieing teams. Like, no one, I mean, Campbell obviously played well down the stretch, but if you probably look at the totality of our goaltending throughout the season with how bad Freddie was early on, it probably evened out to just about average, like after Campbell's heroics. So those are the numbers, everyone. At the end of the day, this team was defensively strong. So he inherited a team that could score. He reinforced the D. He made that Jack Campbell trade, whether he knew what he was doing with regard to how that would end up at the time. It worked out for him. So he has to be given at least some credit. He was questioned as to the leadership and the type of players who are on this team after this team lost again last year. He picked up a veteran in Brody. He added Simmons. He added Thornton. He kept Spezza. Then at the deadline, he added a top 6 forward with grit and experience like Nick Foligno. What else could this guy have done? What else? And I keep telling people, you can argue all day about the makeup of this team. I will listen to anyone who wants to say that the money should be distributed in a different way throughout the lineup. If someone says, there's too much money up front and it should get put more on D, or it should be just a more balanced attack, I'll listen to that. I'll listen to that opinion. But I still say, point to the worst contract on the Toronto Maple Leafs for me. Because I'd like to see, like, if we listed every team's worst contract, or even like their worst 2 or 3 contracts, and did a power ranking of all the team, like the list of all the teams and all those contracts, like where would those contracts lie? The ones that are Maple Leafs contracts. So to that point, I mean, the GM has to be given some credit. And even too, with the point of how the money could be better distributed throughout the lineup, I will listen to that even further if we're talking about winning a Stanley Cup. Winning a Stanley Cup, say if we lost to Tampa in the final or Colorado in the semifinal, something like that, and someone pointed to that, I'd really listen to that and say, yeah, maybe that is the case. But we're talking about winning a round. A round. Like, I don't want to hear a take that says this team can't win a round because they have too much firepower and the team should be more balanced and maybe they need something on D. Well, I've just told you quantitatively this team is strong defensively. So the reason this team can't get past the first round is because instead of 3 forwards making around 11 million, they should have 2 making 11 and then trade that one for 1 making 6 and 1 making 5. Like, give me a break, right? Like, now we're getting into like fine details. And again, like, to the point of the lineup, that doesn't objectively make the team better. Like, if we traded, like, those like, oh, trade Marner. Now, again, how that money was distributed, people forget the idea of you actually lose that player. Like, if we have Mitch Marner at $11 million, and let's say he's traded for a $6 million forward and then a $5 million defenseman, that doesn't objectively make the Toronto Maple Leafs better. They lost Mitch Marner and replaced him with a $6 million forward who, in all likelihood, is not as good as him. Now, again, I would entertain it. I would listen to that point. But people make it like it's black and white. Like, this is what they need to do. No. And even to that player, what do you do now? Is he on the first line? Does it add to third line depth? And even too, like, you look at this series, and like, now I'm going on a full-on rander, but I guess that's why we're here. We spend all year, all season, talking about different teams and money distribution and contracts, both in the way of things you can control and things you cannot control. Think of how messed up things can get when it comes to playoff time with regard to how your money's spread out. Like let's look at the Leafs here, okay? So game 1, Tavares gets hurt. That's $11 million gone. So now the Leafs are playing $11 million under the cap. And before everyone freaks out at me for making excuses as to why they lost, that's for later in the podcast. But right now we're just talking about things that actually happened. So Tavares is hurt. That's $11 million gone. That's something you can't control. Now I'll point to something you can control. Jack Campbell beat out Freddie. Freddie makes $5 million. So now the Leafs are in a situation where they have a $5 million backup goalie. Is that ideal? So now with JT and Freddie, you're at 16 million not on the ice. 16 million not on the ice. Then Hyman and Foligno clearly both injured. Clearly. So even but playing. So even cut them both in half. What does that add? We're adding another $4 or $5 million. So you're at a point now where you're in the 20-something million dollars that's not on the ice. So this whole idea that, like, well, if we move this guy, you replace it with this, there's things in your control, but there are a lot of things that are not in your control that happen when it comes to cap. Now, there's such thing, all you can do as an organization, really and truly, is not have bad contracts. Like, there are teams in this league who have anchors. Now, like, getting extreme here, like Skinner is an anchor. Because even if he is playing, he is an anchor. Like that, it's hard to win now. You have $8 million contributing nothing. Like teams that have goalies making big sums of money.
Like the Bobrovsky contract.
That you can.
Like Florida wants to just roll up into the fetal position looking at that
you're
contract.
Done. You can't compete. So as a GM, all you can do is your very best to have contracts. The way I always put it is the contract tradable? And there's no contract on the Toronto Maple Leafs that's not tradable. And even people want to bring up Mitch Marner. They're like, oh, he's overpaid. What time is it? We're at 11. Kyle Dubas puts out the call to the league or the email, however they do it, that Mitch Marner is on the market. He's gone by tomorrow morning. Like, let's be real here, everybody. Even if GMs are sitting there thinking, the guy makes $1 million or $2 million too much, players like that are like rare, everyone. And again, I'm not saying
a team with cap space.
Oh my God.
Like they're jumping at that opportunity.
Yeah,
bringing
and
a
I
guy
see
like Mitch Marner.
and I see all these fans and fans, Twitter, all that, like chirping Marner, haha, this and that. I hate to break it to you, your GM, whoever he is, whatever team you cheer for, would give his left testicle for Mitch Marner. Like if your team, especially if you're a team that can't score, you can solve that problem right away. And I would embrace that if the Leafs were having problems scoring and we had cap space and Mitch Marner played for the Chicago Blackhawks. Okay,
like, let's go.
Let's go.
Try to get Mitch Marner in here.
Exactly. Yeah, what player do I not in the history of the NHL? I would never point to a player in any era who is top 5 in scoring and be like, I don't want him. Like let's be real, guys. Like when you're getting into things like that, like no, like back to the reason for this conversation, no blame can be put on Dubas. As for Keefe, his best players didn't perform. Like I don't think there's a lot to talk about here. I mean, that's something I would leave to people who've coached the game. Like I've never coached, so they can talk about matchups or what he should have done or could have done maybe when Tavares went out or lineup changes. There are a couple I would point to. Like I would have liked to have seen Brooks get more of a chance. I thought he looked really good in the regular season, but if we're pointing to guys who would have maybe been on the 4th line, man, I'm not going to point to that as a reason why this team lost, but that's my rant, Bruno. What do you think about the 2 men in charge?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to Kyle Dubas, I think you nailed it, Lepore. Like, I think we would be crazy to sit here and criticize this guy for how he constructed this roster. Like you said, what else could he have done? I mean, I look specifically at the defense core, like you touched on. He objectively improve this defense core across the board. I've come on this podcast all year and said that this is the best Leafs defense core that we've seen in a long time. Yeah. I mean, it's been a decade, 2 decades. Like I have not seen
the early 2000s, Bruno.
It's for real. Like I have not seen a 6-man unit this well balanced and this good in probably 10 to 20 years on this team. Like just when I look at the top pair, the second pair, the third pair, they had depth too, like even to bring in a guy like they're healthy scratching, like Sandin in the series, like switching in Sandin and Dermott. Like that was a good place to be in. So I don't think you can look at this defense core and say that is the reason that the Leafs lost this series. Now, can you look at, the terrible turnover that Travis Dermott made in the overtime that led to the Jesperi Kotkaniemi goal? Sure. I mean, that was bad, but I think you're nitpicking at that point. When you
Those are isolated incidents, yeah.
Exactly. When you look at the totality of the situation, especially with the defense core and even the team defense for that matter, like it was fine. It was more than good enough to win this series. So, I think people are crazy to try and blame Kyle Dubas at this point. And I said this on the last show, like Kyle Dubas was literally sitting in the press box or standing in the press box very nervously, I should say. And he honestly looked like most fans, like just flabbergasted. Yeah. Like, what the hell else do I need to do to win a friggin' playoff series? Like, this is unbelievable.
He was so defeated. You could see it in his body language, just defeated.
It's crazy, man. So, yeah, I mean, when you look at Kyle Dubas, there's really not a lot you can blame it. And yeah, and I don't want to get into the whole like, oh, why is Joe Thornton on the team? And maybe they should have signed Corey Perry instead of Wayne Simmons. So what, you're swapping out a couple bottom 6 forwards? And listen, I was very critical of Joe Thornton this year. And I didn't think that he played well. I mean, he only played well against Ottawa basically for like a 3-game stretch, if that. So, I mean, there weren't a lot of good moments from Jumbo Joe. And I know he scored a goal in this series, but I mean, he was a disappointment, but at the end of the day, the guy's making $700,000, and Wayne Simmons as well. Like the guy's making, what was it? 1.5 million.
Something like
listen,
that.
Wayne Simmons was disappointing. I think he could have been better. I don't think he brought enough physicality, and offensively, he was essentially invisible.
He can't skate, man.
Yeah. I mean, he's just too slow for the game at this point. Right. So we can nitpick some of those things, but at the end of the day, neither of those guys are playing primary roles on this team. So yeah, I think Kyle Dubas gets a pass for this. And I think if you're Brendan Shanahan, you're thinking the same thing. You're like, how could I possibly fire Kyle Dubas at this point? Like, I've made the decision that we are going in this direction. I want Kyle to build this team. I'm supporting him. the analytics movement, like every decision that Kyle Dubas has made for the most part, honestly, the majority of them have worked out. So no, I am not placing any blame on Kyle Dubas. Now, as for Sheldon Keefe, like you said, Lepore, listen, I'm not a coach either. And I know some of the X's and O's, like I played hockey, not at a incredibly high level. Same with you. Like we've both played the game, but I'm not.
Why do you assume I didn't play at a high level?
Well, neither
just
of us
to clarify, everyone.
NHL.
Just to clarify, everyone, I didn't play at a very high level.
Yeah. So, like I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, let's break down the X's and O's of this matchup and that matchup. Now, I know some people are a little bit upset with how Keefe stuck with Matthews and Marner, right? How both of them were struggling, and people were saying, he should have split them up, put Matthews and Nylander together, and put Marner on the second line. Maybe you can look at that, but listen, everybody, Austin Matthews scored 41 goals in the regular season. Him and Mitch Marner, top 5 in scoring. Like these were two of the most elite offensive talents in the league this year. And, are you really just going to go away from that when that has worked all season? And I understand they were struggling in that series, but at the end of the day, that line was still getting looks. Were they getting as many high-quality scoring chances as they were in the regular season? No, I don't think they were. And I think Montreal did a solid job containing them. And I think Price was absolutely unbelievable in this series and deserves a lot of credit. Quite frankly, I think he was the MVP of this series. But at the end of the day, like they still had their scoring chances. And I even look at Zach Hyman in Game 7. Now, would you have liked Matthews to have those 3 or 4 point blank opportunities right in front of Carey Price? Yes, absolutely. But guess what? They set up Zach Hyman plenty of times in front of the net, point blank chances, and Carey Price was right there to shut the door. So at the end of the day, it's not like that line wasn't generating anything. It was frustrating. They were,
well, you said 50 something shots, like at the end of the day.
Exactly. So yeah, if you want to look at that and say, well, you know what, Keefe should have just put things in the blender and threw Nylander back with Matthews. Well, you know what Sheldon Keefe did do? He loaded up Matthews, Marner, and Nylander. There were several times during the series where, and more towards the end of the series, where he put those 3 guys out together, whether it was on offensive zone draws or whether it was just a shift where he said, screw it, I'm going to put my 3 big boys out and see if we can create some offense and make something happen. But at the end of the day, I don't blame Sheldon Keefe even for how he deployed the defense core. I thought Morgan Rielly and TJ Brody were excellent in this series. They played heavy minutes. Morgan Rielly, I thought, was amazing, quite frankly. I thought he was all over the place. I thought he played well defensively. He was jumping into the play offensively. He was playing with a ton of confidence, trying to generate anything that he could in the offensive zone. Like I thought honestly haven't seen Morgan Rielly that confident probably all season. Like
the best he looked all year, hands down.
Like he was playing like I am the number 1 defenseman on this team, and I'm one of the best D-men in the NHL, and I'm going to try and take over this game. And honestly, I thought he did everything in his power to put the Leafs in a position to generate as much offense as they possibly could, and it just didn't work out. So, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Lepore, this is on the players. And we've talked about this before. This is on the players, and you can nitpick certain things that Dubas did and certain decisions that Keefe made with the lineup, but at the end of the day, this falls on the players. I'm sorry. I don't want to blame anybody else but the players on the ice who proved throughout the entire season that they were the best team in the North Division, that dominated the Habs all season, that dominated the Habs for the most part through the first 4 games of this series, and then decided to fall flat on their face and lose the last 3 games. All right, Lepore. So saying all that, now let's shift over to the other side of this. We talked about who was to blame when it comes to the Toronto Maple Leafs, but now looking at the Montreal Canadiens, okay? And like I mentioned earlier in the show, okay, when this series was 3-1, nobody thought the Habs were winning this series. Leaf fans, Habs fans, anyone who watches the NHL, they all thought this series was done. And just think about it, right? So the Leafs take a 3-1 series lead without their $11 million captain, without Nick Foligno, their top trade deadline acquisition, okay? And Marner and Matthews had scored just one goal. Obviously, they scored one goal the whole series, but up until that point, just one goal. So those guys hadn't even played well. And the Leafs had a 3-1 series lead. And at that point, Lepore, in the season series, the Leafs were 10-3-1 in 14 games against the Montreal Canadiens. So going back to the regular season and those first 4 games of the playoffs, the Leafs beat the Habs 10 out of 14 times. So just thinking about all that, can you blame any Leaf fan whatsoever for having a little bit of confidence and thinking, wow, we're up 3-1 on this team without our captain, without Nick Foligno, without Matthews and Marner doing much of anything. And now all we have to do is win one of the last 3 games, and we're finally going to win a playoff series for the first time in 17 years. So you are absolutely kidding yourself if you're a Habs fan and you're thinking, and you thought that series could actually swing the other way at that point. And listen, Habs fans, I see you guys on Twitter, and I see you in the YouTube comments and in the TikTok comments. You guys all thought the series was done. Everyone's calling for Bergevin's head. Ducharme's out of here. We got to rebuild this roster. We don't have enough talent, this and that. So don't give me this bullshit that when it was 3-1, that you thought that there was a hope in hell that the Montreal Canadiens were coming back. Now, saying all that, credit to the Habs, who fought back. They won 3 straight games when no one thought they could do it. That is unbelievable. But Lepore, I ask you this question. How much credit do the Montreal Canadiens deserve for coming back to win this series after being 3-1 down?
Before I get to that, as you were going on your rant, I was looking over the games from the series, and to your point of how everyone thought that series was over, stick a fork in it, it was done. The Leafs won that game 4-0. 4-0 on the road. So just like this is, and it was just, I remember Montreal looked deflated, and like just watching like the Leafs celebrate that win with Campbell, just that confidence, that strut, it was like, this is over. Like, this is over. I think even Biz Nasty, Paul Bissonnette made a joke saying like, yeah, the Leafs should play the next game like shorthanded to see if the Habs can score a goal or something. And of course he's getting ripped on Twitter now for that one. But in any series, in any sport, when something happens of this magnitude of an upset, there's going to be 2 sides. There's a side of, there's a lot of blame to be placed on the side that was quote unquote supposed to win, but there's some credit has to be given to the team that pulled the upset. So I kind of changed my mindset after game 7, because when this series was 3-3, I'll be honest here, I was giving very little credit to Montreal. Very little credit to Montreal for this series being at 3-3. And bear with me here, I'll tell you why. Toronto could not get out of their own way. Now, of course, Montreal has to put the puck in the net when Toronto is giving them opportunities, but the Montreal Canadiens are an NHL hockey team. If you give them 2-on-0s, they will typically score. Going back and looking at this series, and again, and people are going to freak out at me for this one, the Montreal Canadiens did not score a single goal with offensive zone possession. Late in game 7, that goal the Leafs scored where the puck came behind the net and it was fed out front to Nylander, there wasn't a single goal of that nature that Montreal scored. Every goal they scored in the series was off a turnover, was off an offensive zone or defensive zone turnover by Toronto. And then the 3 power play goals, where one of them was a 5-on-3 that was given after Marner snapped the puck over the glass, and the one in game 7 that was going, I think, 2 feet wide and went off Perry's knee and in. Now, you have to capitalize on your opportunities, so Montreal does get full credit for that. But going into game 7, I was giving Montreal very little credit. I was more just throwing shit at my favorite hockey team, and I'm not afraid to do that. Now, looking at game 7, to me, game 7 was what you and I thought this series would look like if Montreal won. When we sat here and we did our predictions, I went on the rant of, if Montreal is going to be successful, they have to close things down. They have to make it an ugly game. They have to make it a slow game. And Carey Price has to play well. Unquestionably, Game 7 was the best game Montreal played all series.
Couldn't agree more.
Hands down. That was a perfect on the road playoff game against a team that is more talented than you are. Perfect. And what I will point to as well is that we touched on how Marner and Matthews were not at their best in this series. It was obvious that they just didn't play well. Who is the best player for the Montreal Canadiens?
Carey Price.
And in game 7, the most important game, Carey Price was Montreal's best player. Hands down. So after the first 6 games, I was not giving Montreal any credit. I was giving them very little credit, if any at all. But then when I saw game 7, when it mattered most, I kind of flipped, saying, you know what? I'll give it to them now because of this performance in this one game. Carey Price, their most important player, showed up and was their best player. And it's a thing maybe the Leafs can look in the mirror and say, look what he did, because we sure as hell didn't. So they deserve a heck of a lot of credit there for showing up in that game and essentially playing a perfect game. The thing with the Carey Price thing with this series, a lot of people are, I mean, you said before, he's clearly the MVP of this series. And it's one of those things, like if there was an MVP of every round, I mean, if you could lay bets on that and there was the list, I mean, you probably wouldn't win very much money if you bet on Carey Price if you knew Montreal was going to win the series, because everyone knew, well, Carey Price has to be Carey Price, and everyone knows what I mean by that. For Montreal to win this series, it's obvious he's got to be the man, and he was like Carey Price was very, very good in this series, and he was excellent in game 7. But I don't necessarily think that was the story of the series. I think a lot of people are being kind of lazy with it and just quickly pointing to Carey Price. That's the reason this series was won by Montreal. And before Habs fans flip out at me and throw shit at me for saying that, I think saying Carey Price was the biggest story of this series is giving too much credit to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Like, we didn't get goalied. Like, I'll be very, very quick to say that the Toronto Maple Leafs were not goalied in this series, because if we were goalied, or at least if I thought we were goalied, I would just be putting my hands up in the air and saying, well, that was it. We dominated and we couldn't score, because that's how I pictured that type of series.
Well, Lepore, just at the end of the day, the Leafs outscored the Habs 18-14 in this series.
There you go. He got beat. Looking at the list of games, so Price got beat by, like, that game 4. He was beat for 4 goals, and the next game he was beat for 3. Like, Toronto wasn't really having a big problem in those early phases scoring. And again, if that was the case, like when I picture a series like that, I'm picturing games where one team is out shooting another team 45-20, and the goalie's making these 5-star saves, and the team that's out shooting the other team loses 2-1. That wasn't how this series went. He did play excellent throughout the entire series. I'm not taking any of that away. And he was the man in game 7. But I'm not going to look back at this series as a series where the Leafs just ran into the hottest goalie in the world and couldn't score, because, again, I think that's giving too much credit to the Leafs, because I don't think they played very well. If the case where Price played amazing and we couldn't beat him, that would entail the Leafs dominated and couldn't get that last step of putting the puck in. But I don't think the Leafs dominated. So he was a big, big part of it. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for why the Montreal Canadiens won this series. But I hate to say, like, I think Carey Price is getting too much credit, but I just don't think that was the main story of the series. To me, Price is one story of the series. Another story is Matthews and Marner not performing and just simply not being good enough. And I'll get to why that happened in a second. And the third part to me is the turnovers. At the end of the day,
too many turnovers.
Sandin, well, game 1, both of Montreal's goals came off offensive zone turnovers from Thornton. Later in the series, it was Rasmus Sandin had 2 turnovers in his own end. One he was hit, credit to the forechecker, but the puck came out. Montreal scored. Then there was the brutal one he had behind the net, and then the 2 in overtime. I mean, pathetic. But even game 7, the Marner one, Marner gives it up at the
offensive blue line,
and it comes back
the Gallagher goal.
It comes back the other way. Back to my point, Montreal did not score a single goal in the series where they had possession in Toronto's end. They all came back the other way, or they were a turnover. Now, again, credit to Montreal for scoring. You have to score, but a lot of the blame there goes on Toronto. Where I do place a lot of credit myself, and I'd love to hear what Canadiens fans think of this, is, again, to the point of Matthews and Marner not performing, there also has to be the other side of there's guys trying to shut them down. And to me, Danault did a great job. And, I've seen those guys, the Habs fans on Twitter for years. Like Danault's kind of like the joke of their first line center. And they do give him credit for being a fundamentally sound guy. Like, he wins faceoffs, he is good defensively, but they kind of laugh like, this is our first line center. But credit has to be given to him. I mean, there has to be a reason on the opposite side of why guys like Matthews and Marner are not performing. And also the addition to Evans in the lineup. Let's face it, Montreal just acknowledged to a further extent what they had to do to win and a style they had to play to win. So bringing Evans in the lineup, I mean, they won those games, so credit has to be given there. So I guess that's a high five to Ducharme if you're a Montreal Canadiens fan. But as far as credit goes to the Montreal Canadiens, I flip late in the series. Saying, you know what? At that point, I did not think that they deserved too much credit just based on how bad Toronto was. My opinion was I thought anyone could beat Toronto based on how bad I thought Toronto was playing. But then in game 7, the way they played, they went into Toronto to win, and they executed a game plan, and they played a perfect style to beat the Leafs on the road, and their best player was their best player. So that's it. That's where I do give the Montreal Canadiens a lot of credit for winning the series.
Yeah, fair enough, Lepore. And here's where I'm going to agree and disagree with you with some of the takes you just had. So Here's where I agree with you that really that game 7 was the best game Montreal played all series. And like you mentioned, heading into this series, if you thought that the Habs had a chance to be in the series, to win the series, that is how they had to play. And credit to them for playing a perfect game 7 on the road, like you said. But when you look at that game 5 and that game 6, the Habs blew a 3-0 lead.
Yeah.
And then they blew a 2-0 lead in game 6. So in back-to-back games, you're blowing multiple goal leads and getting away with it in overtime on just egregious turnovers from the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Quick note, it was the first time in NHL history that a team surrendered multi-goal third period leads in consecutive games and won. Hashtag Toronto Maple Leafs.
It's unbelievable. So for Habs fans, you cannot sit there and tell me that the Habs, played a great game and outplayed the Leafs in games 5 and 6, because honestly, that just simply wasn't the case. Now, were there moments in both of those games, periods in both of those games where the Habs were the better team? Yes, of course. I specifically point to that first period in game 6.
Game 6, yeah, that was their best period.
Playing in front of the 2,500 fans at the Bell Center, where the Habs came out and looked phenomenal. The Leafs looked shell-shocked. But when you look at games 5 and 6 as a whole, I don't think the Montreal Canadiens, played that well. I didn't think they played nearly as well as they did in game 7, where they literally executed their game plan to a T. They didn't give the Leafs much at all. They decided to kind of sit back a little bit more, play a little bit more tight defensively, jump on those opportunities when the Leafs turned over the puck. And again, credit to them, because when the Leafs turned over the puck and Montreal went the other way on the rush, they made the Leafs pay. It's as simple as that. But when you look at, all the underlying numbers, the Leafs outshot the Habs. They outscored the Habs in this series. They outchanced the Habs. They had more high danger scoring chances than the Habs. So looking at the entire series as a whole, honestly, I don't think the Habs did anything spectacular, let's say, to prove that they were definitely the better team in this series. Obviously, they won the series, but as we know in hockey, the best team doesn't always win. It's as simple as that. right? The best team doesn't always win. Sometimes, you're going to get a hot goalie. Crazy things are going to happen. Injuries are going to happen. Again, I'm not making any excuses for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, we did not deserve to win.
Yeah, they were a complete embarrassment.
The Leafs did not deserve to win.
3 games in a row.
And Montreal deserved to win.
Completely blew it. Credit to Montreal. They fought back and took the series. And you have to give credit to them for doing that. But saying all that, I don't think you can just sit there and look at this entire 7-game series and be like, yes, the Habs were absolutely the better team. They literally just weren't until all the chips were on the line and everything mattered in that game 7. And it's as simple as that. And credit to them for seizing the moment and seizing the opportunity and winning a game 7 on the road.
And that's where you have to give the high five. The game 7, Montreal played a perfect game in game 7.
The best game they played all series, hands down. But here's where I'm going to disagree with you, Lepore. I think Carey Price was the main reason they won that series. And like you said, it wasn't even a matter of the Leafs. You could say they got goalied. I'll say they got goalied. But
you think they got goalied?
I do agree with you, though, Lepore, with the point that you made that the Leafs weren't dominating the play. It's not like they were out shooting the Habs 2-1 every game and Carey Price was making 10 bell saves, every couple of minutes. Like that wasn't the case. But Carey Price was phenomenal, and you cannot ignore the stats. Obviously, you look at the save percentage, 932 save percentage, not insane. But when you look at the advanced stats, according to moneypuck.com, Carey Price had a ridiculous 6.8 goals saved above expected in this series, which was crazy. Phenomenal. The only other goalies that had a better goals saved above expected in the first round of the playoffs were Andrei Vasilevsky and Connor Hellebuck, who was absolutely ridiculous against the Oilers. He had 7.5 goals saved above expected. And the reason I give Carey Price a lot of the credit is because what I'm about to say about Phillip Danault. Listen, I understand Phillip Danault, his brand is he's the defensive center. He's responsible in his own end. He shuts down the other team's best lines. Well, if you just look at the numbers in this series, Montreal Canadiens fans, did you know that with Phillip Danault on the ice at 5-on-5 in this series, they were outscored 3-0, Montreal, had a minus 21 scoring chance differential, and were minus 10 in high danger scoring chances with Phillip Danault on the ice at 5-on-5 in this series. So looking at that, I'm sorry, you cannot tell me that Phillip Danault was shutting down Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner. Okay, I think the guy that was shutting down Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner was Carey Price.
Yeah,
and I thought he was fucking
that's Danault
incredible.
Giving Price a high five in the locker room after every game. That's what that is. Yeah,
like he was just unbelievable in this series. And I talked about this on our last show. It's not even that he makes all these flashy saves. He's so calm and comfortable and quiet in that net where he's always in position. It's unbelievable. He makes very difficult saves look so easy. And I think that's really what makes Carey Price the guy that he is. That's
the talent. That to me, that's like the talent thing. Like I always say, like when that goalie comes flinging across and like there's a lot of luck there. But when Price that little side to side bloop and it hits him in the chest, I remember Belfour was like that too. Like you almost didn't get a credit for a lot of great saves just because he was so fundamentally good. But yeah, that's where Price is so impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you think about guys like Dominic Hasek or even like Marc-Andre Fleury in today's game, right?
Yeah.
How they're flopping around and making all these athletic saves. That's not Carey Price. Carey Price is just always in position. And not that he's not athletic. He's an athletic guy. But the way that he plays the position and how calm he is and how he's always in the right position. Anytime you think you have an opening, anytime you think you have a split second to beat him, he's just always there. His angles are perfect. Like he's just awesome. There's really no other way to put it. So at the end of the day, I give full credit to Carey Price. And not that the Habs, listen, I think that.
So more so, let me ask you how you put it this, like to that point. How much credit do you give the Montreal Canadiens after Carey Price? I think that's the question I'd like to ask you. Because I think that's more what we're discussing here. It's like, we know Carey Price is Carey Price, but how much credit does the team get beyond Carey Price? Like, how do you answer that question?
That's a really good question, Lepore. And here's what I'll say about that. I think we almost have to give more credit to Montreal's top 4 D-men than we do, Philip Deneau and Brendan Gallagher and Jake Evans. And sure, did Deneau, Gallagher, and Evans, like, they were good. They were good. I'm not saying that they didn't affect, Matthews and Marner whatsoever, because that would be false. But again, looking at those numbers I just showed you with Philip Deneau, they got outscored and outchanced at 5-on-5 with him on the ice in this series. But I think we got to give a lot of credit to that top 4 unit on the Montreal Canadiens, who played a ton of minutes. Shea Weber, Ben Sherratt, Joel Edmondson. I mean, Jeff Petrie. These guys were just beasts. I think it was in the, I believe was it in game 6 where they all played like 37 minutes?
Yeah, I think you're right. Like Weber played an insane.
Yeah, it was either game 5 or game 6 where those top 4 D-men all played like over 35 minutes, and the bottom pair of like Kulak and Gustafsson played like 6 minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
So I just thought they were really tough to play against in the D zone. I thought that they broke up the cycle when they needed to. I thought that they did a good job standing up Leaf forwards at the blue line and denying zone entries. I thought they were really good. So I almost think that they're not getting enough credit, and we're just kind of giving too much credit to Philip Deneau because for whatever reason, there's this narrative out there that he's like the best shutdown center in the NHL, which is honestly sort of laughable. But yeah, I think that defensive core of the Montreal Canadiens and of course, Carey Price really, really stepped up in this series. And we can look at Dominic Ducharme for some of the adjustments that he made as well. You have to give him some credit too, because again, there was a lot of Habs fans that were shitting on Bergevin, shitting on Ducharme, especially after the 3-1 lead. And he made decisions, like you said, bringing Jake Evans into the lineup, which obviously helped their cause. So yeah, I think you have to give the Habs credit, but it's a lot more, there's a lot more layers and it's more complicated than people think, just saying, oh, it was all Carey Price. Carey Price just won the series, right? Or it was all just Matthews and Marner because they sucked, right? So yeah, at the end of the day, listen, the Habs are moving on to round 2, and it doesn't matter how they got it done. It doesn't matter that they got outscored. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters are wins. And they beat the Leafs and gave the Leafs one of their worst collapses in team history, which I think is the number 1 worst collapse in Leafs history.
That'll be another episode. We'll do the list. But let me ask you then something like from one Leafs fan to another. And it'd be interesting to ask Canadiens fans this too. So, yeah, what did Price finish with? Like a 9.37 in the series, like something like that?
9.32 save percentage.
Okay, so I think I saw after game 6, he was like 9.25, which is still very good. I mean, 9.25 is 9.25. But had someone told you before the series started that through 6 games, maybe it's over in 6, maybe it's not, but through 6 games, Carey Price would have a 9.2 something save percentage, would you take that?
I would.
I'd like to ask Canadiens fans that too. Like if someone said if Price is going to play at 9.2 whatever, are you confident?
They all would have taken that. Lepore. He had a 9.01 save percentage in the regular season. Canadians.
Okay, but would you have taken it as a Leaf fan?
As I would have taken that as a Leaf fan.
I think I would have taken it as and that's to my point of I don't think the Leafs got goalied. Like to me, goalied means like it's bananas. Like he's got like a 9.4 something, like kind of like when we played Columbus last year. Like 9.2 something is very good. It's not like unreasonably good. And that's where, again, I'm not taking credit away from him. I think he was excellent and he was their MVP. And in game 7, he was the best player. And that's when you do point to the contract and say, that's why we pay him 10 point whatever $million. But if I can say, you know what, if we're playing Carey Price and he's going to have like a reasonably good or very good save percentage, not a bananas save percentage, like a historically good save percentage. Because that's what I would have thought it would have taken for the Leafs to lose. I'll be honest. And people can call me a homer or whatever. I would have said Carey Price has to have a historically good series, like something that we look back at in 20 years. But like almost like the someone brought up the Halak, when Halak with Montreal beat both Washington and Pittsburgh, where it's like those series were hilarious. Like those teams just couldn't score on him. So again, like full credit to Carey Price. But I think with us here both saying that we would have taken like a 9.2 something save percentage from him, we'd feel pretty good about that. Kind of shows that this just wasn't the be all end all Carey Price series, to your point, that there's a lot more layers to this.
Oh, and you want to talk about who got goalied, Lepore? Connor Hellebuck in the first round against the Edmonton Oilers had a .955 save percentage at 5-on-5
That's
and a
impossible.
.950 save percentage in total in this series.
Impossible.
You want to talk about getting goalied?
Yeah.
Those numbers are outrageous. And like I said, Hellebuck had a better goals saved above expected than Carey Price. As good as we all, think Carey Price played, as good as he proved he is, and as amazing as he was throughout that series, Hellebuck was even better. So think about that. So if you want to talk about frustration, that Oilers team has a great case to say that they got goalied, and that was the main reason that they lost that series to the Winnipeg Jets. But Lepore, let's move on now and talk about the injuries in this series. So all season, again, I heard from Habs fans, you can't just look at, the
you're gonna go there,
record
Bruno,
because so-and-so was out of the lineup. Gallagher was out. Tatar was out. Price was out, so on and so forth. And then obviously in this series against the Toronto Maple Leafs, they lost their $11 million captain. They lost Nick Foligno for 3 games, and he played injured basically the entire series. His cap hit is $5.5 million. And I know it's different because they, acquired him at the trade deadline, but whatever. So he has a $5.5 million cap hit. And then the Leafs lost Jake Muzzin as well, who didn't play half of game 6 and all of game 7. So, for the Habs fans out there that wanted to use the injury excuses all year, and I actually debunked this on, I believe it was on YouTube at one point, or someone was commenting. The Leafs almost had like the exact same man games lost to injury this season that the Montreal Canadiens did. When you think about Freddie Anderson and Joe Thornton and Wayne Simmons and Matthews, who missed 4 games, Nylander, who was on the COVID protocol list.
Right. Yeah,
like
it seems like
there
so
was
long
ago. The Leafs had some injuries this season. Zach Hyman with the sprained MCL, like Zach Bogosian, who had the upper body injury. So both teams suffered from injuries this season. But in this first round, the Montreal Canadiens were essentially perfectly healthy, and the Toronto Maple Leafs were missing almost $20 million worth of the cap. Actually, it was it was over $20 million worth of cap space in terms of injuries when you add Jake Muzzin into it. So, Lepore, man, I ask you this, how much did the Leafs injuries matter in this series? Are we not putting enough into this? Again, we are the first ones to say no excuses for the Leafs. You take a 3-1 series lead without Tavares and Foligno. You still got to close this out against this Habs team that, quite frankly, just wasn't very good this season. But Lepore, how much did these injuries matter in this series?
That's loaded, man. I think you'd be ridiculous to say that with the totality of it, that the series wouldn't have been different. Like, as much as people want to point to things and say, oh, injuries don't matter, it happens to everyone, both for positive or negative. If John Tavares does not get hurt in the first 5 minutes of this series, the series is completely different. Maybe Montreal wins in 4. Maybe Toronto wins in 4. Like, everything totally flips on its head. So
injuries do matter. And I would normally be very quick to point to the injuries Toronto suffered, because at the end of the day, like I pointed to earlier, the amount of just pure money under the cap Toronto was playing with during this series, like by the end of it. But you touched on it already. I think that all goes out the window when you're up 3-1. And I think if it was a more even series in the way of like games 1 back and forth, like if it wasn't a series where Toronto went up 3-1 and Montreal came storming back, I think the injury thing would have been more of a talking point in the media, but it's all forgotten because the narrative is just the Leafs blew a 3-1 series lead. And I think that's fair, to be honest. This team kind of used the Tavares injury as a rallying cry, and it worked. They won 3 straight in a row. So I think the injuries are a part of it. I mean, like I'll say it, like you're an idiot. Like if you think that like injuries had nothing to do with it. If 5 minutes into the, like we just talked about how Carey Price is the highest paid, most important player to the Montreal Canadiens. If 5 minutes into game 1 of this series, Carey Price would have blown his groin, I would have said, well, Like,
good night, Montreal.
Yeah, good night. And then again, I'm not saying that was the case with Tavares because this team went up 3-1. And I guess to my point, if that happened to Carey Price, and then the Montreal Canadiens went up 3-1, and then Toronto came storming back, would it be fair to blame the Price thing at that point? Like, I think maybe not. I don't know. Maybe that one's a little different. But I just think with Toronto being the higher seed, with having the regular season they did, and with Montreal having the regular season they did, and with the Leafs being up 3-1 in this series, it's still a part of it. But I just think so much other shit happened that it can't really be pointed to. It's part of it because it is part of it. Like any series, a major player gets hurt or a bunch of players get hurt. So you can't just completely ignore it. But maybe when we're all more calm and less emotional, we'll point to it and say, wow, like if you really think about it, like that was pretty incredible. Even how Toronto went up 3-1, like without JT and with Foligno out and Hyman playing on one leg. Like he clearly wasn't at 100%, but at the end of the day, the team was able to go up 3-1. So the fact that they showed they were able to go up 3-1 shows me that you're capable of winning one more game. So, and especially when you have home ice advantage. So yeah, no, like the injuries are part of it because that's just sports, but in no way am I screaming at the top of my lungs about the injuries the Toronto Maple Leafs faced. Like this team blew it. And yeah, that's my take on it, man. And that's what I go with. That's what I'm falling asleep to every night, that the Leafs blew it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you there. We can't say, well, oh, wow, the Leafs took a 3-1 series lead without Tavares and without Foligno, and then turn and say, well, that's why they lost because Tavares and Foligno were out. I mean, Foligno obviously came back later in the series and was playing on the fourth line and did not look good. I mean, that dude could barely move out there. Yeah. But at the end of the day, losing John Tavares, it really mattered more than a lot of people thought. And it almost turned the series into a coin flip. And not just losing Tavares, you lose Foligno. So those are two of your top 6 forwards, essentially, right? And think about it. The Leafs' main advantage as a team, when you look at everything they do well, their main advantage in a 7-game playoff series is that 1-2 punch at center with Austin Matthews and John Tavares. So you lose $11 million. You lose your captain, who played 2 minutes and 53 seconds in this series. It was always going to be a dogfight. It was always going to be an uphill battle from there. And over the course of 7 games, the Leafs had trouble generating scoring chances, especially further down their lineup. I know William Nylander had a great series, regardless of the Tavares injury, who was his line mate for the entire season. But yeah, losing John Tavares really mattered because there were moments where, you saw Marner and Matthews struggling a little bit. It would have certainly helped to have John Tavares and Nylander fly over the bench and maybe play, some minutes that weren't as physically grueling or tough, because obviously the Habs tried to throw the kitchen sink at Matthews and Marner. And that's why I think William Nylander had a good series, because maybe he was playing against, some lesser matchups, had a little bit more room, some time and space. Their focus wasn't, we need to shut down William Nylander. The Habs' focus was, let's try to shut down that top line of the Leafs, and we're going to have a pretty good chance to win this series. So obviously it ended up mattering a lot more than we realized. And we even touched on this on a previous show. Like the further the Leafs got into the playoffs, I think it would have become more and more glaring. Like
watching Colorado. Imagine
going up against Colorado without Tavares, like you might be looking at like a sweep or a 5-game loss there.
Yeah.
But against this Montreal Canadiens team that offensively just isn't as good as the Toronto Maple Leafs, the series was obviously a lot closer. So yeah, you can't just flip and do a 180 and say, well, the Leafs were great without Tavares, and then, they lost 3 in a row. It's because of, John Tavares wasn't in the lineup. It doesn't work like that. So at the end of the day, we can't really blame the injuries. This Leafs team was deep. This Leafs team was talented. They proved all season that they could overcome adversity with all those injuries that I mentioned. So no, the injuries, we can't blame them. And maybe Kyle Dubas will look at that. Maybe Kyle Dubas and Sheldon Keefe will say, well, what the hell? Like my $11 million center wasn't available. Like, what do you want me to do if you're Sheldon Keefe, right? Kyle Dubas, he's going to be like, what else did you want me to do here? $11 million of my $80 million salary cap was out of the lineup in this series. So maybe they're pointing to that, and I'm sure they're frustrated about that. But we all know that there is no excuse, and the Leafs completely blew this. Lepore.
3-1. Yeah, 3-1.
It's as simple as that. So Lepore, before we wrap up this podcast, we can get into this in our next podcast, go into it with a little bit more detail, but
let's sleeps.
Let's have a quick conversation about this because a lot of people are thinking about it. Where do the Leafs go from here? How do they possibly improve this team moving forward? Because when you think about it, honestly, it's a lot more difficult than people realize, especially with those 4 big contracts that take up a massive part of the salary cap. The Leafs have become a team that has had to find cheaper contracts, guys to slot into their bottom 6 in non-primary roles on this team. And listen, I know Freddie Anderson is coming off the books. There's going to be some other, like Zach Hyman's a free agent, Spezza, Thornton, Wayne Simmons, all these guys, right? Like there's money that is going to be freed up, but there's not going to be a lot of flexibility unless they move out one of these big 4 forwards. And you would think Austin Matthews isn't going anywhere. John Tavares has a full no trade clause.
And he's the captain.
He's not going anywhere. William Nylander, his contract is looking pretty damn good now.
Yeah.
Considering how well he played in that series. And a lot of people are pointing to Mitch Marner saying, well, if you're going to do anything, if you're going to open up any sort of flexibility, it's Marner who needs to go, which you talked about earlier in the show. You got into the whole Marner conversation. But Lepore, man, where does this team go from here to improve?
It seems like every Leafs offseason is interesting, but this offseason is going to be very interesting. Actually, just got a tweet. The players are doing their closing interviews today, and Jason Spezza has already said he'd like to re-sign with the Leafs. So good news in Leafland for that one. I think everyone wants that one back. I don't know. I think if I just say right now, I don't think, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to flip out at this one just based on the heat in everyone's blood right now, but I don't think Mitch Marner is going to be traded. Like, I just think it's too big of a thing, like, for them to do it at this point. It's still a weird year. It's a weird series. Like, people are forgetting, like, the circumstances of, like, COVID. Like, I don't think a lot of teams are going to be making a lot of big moves. But like the lineup could be quite different. Like, assuming they do sign Spezza, Thornton's gone. Simmons is gone. I think we'd like to have Bogosian back, but who knows what happens there. You have the whole thing with Seattle, the draft. So those lists are going to come out for every team on who's available and who should and will be taken. Then we'll see who is taken. I'd like to assume, I think all Leafs fans are assuming that Rasmus Sandin is going to be in the lineup next year. Dermott, to that point, is a lot of people have circled as the guy who the Kraken are going to take. We'll see if Liljegren makes the next step. I mean, to me anyway, it's now or never for that kid. Like, if he's not even in the lineup, if he's not in the lineup by the start of next season, we're done here.
Yeah,
like
we've reached the point of him being like this young, up and coming, developing defenseman. Like, at some point, we have to see him play NHL games.
Yeah,
and can he do it or can he not?
Yeah, so we'll see with that one. I don't know. Like, that Brooks, I'd like to see him in the lineup, but the big splash would be, because Marner, we'd see if they make a crazy trade and what they do with that money. The thing is, like, this team is not going to, with whatever they do, they're not going to stray away from like a quote unquote win now mode. So if, again, of the big 4, like you mentioned, the only one that would even sort of make sense is Marner to be traded. So that would be the one. Like, are they doing it for a player and say picks and prospects? Because going into this draft, I think the Leafs have like 3 picks.
Yeah, they only have 3 draft picks.
Yeah, so maybe they get some picks out of it and then a body, and then they fill that money in free agency. Like, people are already like circling Seth Jones, but I mean, like, whatever. Like, that's Leafs writers who want clicks and whatever. Like, I'm not even thinking about that right now. The lineup too, and I know people are so emotional right now, and they're allowed to be. Like, this team just got embarrassed. This is the most embarrassing moment for the Leafs in my life anyway. Like I told my wife, the feeling I have right now is I'm in a relationship and I want to break up with this girl and I'm just somehow not allowed. Like there's something holding me back that like I can't
That's
break
perfect.
up. Like if I could break up with the Toronto Maple Leafs, I could, but I can't because of the emotional investment I've put in this team over my entire life. Like, there's no coming back now. But like, this is embarrassing. So this team, the direction is going to be super interesting they take in this offseason. But at the end of the day, if nothing major is done, this is still, I know people are already I can already see people flipping out of this. They're still a really good team. Like, this is a really good team. And I find what happens differently with the Leafs compared to other teams, and I expect, because everyone likes to shit on the Leafs, is they point to like these quote unquote problems, like with the Leafs salary cap situation, or like how their team is built. And they'll point to like the most ideal situation of another team. And it's like, well, you can't do that. It's like you can't point to like, well, so-and-so has so-and-so at an amazing contract. It's like, well, at the time, when they signed him, it wasn't an amazing
it's like,
contract.
what do you want them to restructure Matthews' contract?
Yeah,
like, Matthews, you're now making $7.5 million, so we can perfectly allocate the rest of this money somewhere else. Right?
Yeah, I actually say, like, to me, if we, and now we're getting way ahead of ourselves here, and like Leafs fans like to do this, if this group is not successful, and by successful, I mean like able to make like playoff runs and this and that, what I will point to that I think doesn't get spoken about enough is the problem the Leafs faced that I think the other strong teams in the league did not face, is our young studs got too good too early. Like, Matthew scored 40 goals as a rookie. So what do you do? Like, God forbid, it's like if Austin Matthews was the exact same player he was today, but say he, even as a rookie, as a 19-year-old, had he scored like 25, that would have been amazing. Like, say he scored 25 and then 30 and then 32. And then he's at the negotiating table. No, he had to score 40 as a rookie. And then how to work? I think he's actually scored 40 all 3 years of his.
Because he missed, there was
he missed
some
games
seasons where he missed like 10, 15 games. And he's like right there. He has the most even strength goals since the second he entered the NHL.
Yeah.
He leads the NHL in goals per game since he entered the league. So he's essentially the best goal scorer in the world at this point. And it's like you said, right? He didn't like slowly progress. Lepore, from the minute this kid stepped in the league, he was essentially like a top 5 scorer on the planet.
Like I've told people here in Ottawa, I mean, like, they love Stützle and they have the right to love Stützle. He's a great player. I'm like, guys, think about it. As much as you love this kid and he's amazing and fun to watch, when Austin Matthews was that age, it'd be like Stützle. Imagine like this reaction of fans or like the hype around this kid if he scored 40.
Oh,
like, what? Like now it almost seems like so crazy that we had this rookie 19 was scoring 40 goals, and then to the point of how this kept going, Marner second year was like 94 points.
Yeah, it was like his third year in the league. I believe he had 94 points.
Yeah, so it's like, well, what
led
like,
the team in scoring basically every year.
Yeah, like what do you pay him? Like, I mean, argue all day, 11 million, 10 million, 9 million, but at the end of the day, he was going to get paid. Like, he was going to be given elite money because he was showing that he was an elite player. But I don't know. Like I don't think there's any major moves. Like, I really don't. I think you're going to see a lot of small changes. Like I said, I hope Spets is back. I hope Bogosian's back. We'll see what Robertson can do. We'll see what Sandin can do. Other kids from the Marlies I'd like to see more of. Who knows? Like, the Leafs like to sign European free agents. We'll see if something along those lines happen. I guess the big thing will be Freddie, right? Like, I think right now everyone's just assuming that Freddie's gone and Hyman is going to make up that money. So, and then whoever gets inserted as the backup or sort of like a two-headed monster, that could be something. Like, if the Leafs kind of go into next year with a different approach and they have a two-headed monster. But I mean, at the end of the day, whatever they do, I mean, they'll be criticized for it. And if Marner is not traded, it'll be criticized. And who knows, maybe next year we're in the exact same spot and the Leafs are out in the first round And our good friend Julian Barbosa is smashing his laptop again, watching from England. Shout out to Julian Barbosa.
Shout out Julian.
Yeah. I was fearing for his laptop as we were watching Game 7, and he's in England watching.
Not only is he a Leaf fan, he's an Atlanta Falcons fan. So there's some dark times for Julian Barbosa following those two teams, man.
Yeah. So it'll be an interesting offseason. And like you said, we'll have more sleeps, and maybe we'll dive deeper into it in the next episode.
Yeah, no, Lepore, it's like you said, I don't see, a major trade happening. I really don't. I know a lot of people are quick to jump the gun and they're saying Marner has to get traded. This is the only thing that has to happen because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So one of these guys has to get traded. And listen, I hear you, everyone who's saying that, because, it's now been 5 years that we're into the Matthews and Marner era, and this core has failed to win one playoff series. That's unacceptable. Yeah. Especially considering how they all burst onto the scene. Like Lepore said, Matthews comes in as a 19-year-old rookie and scores 40 goals. Marner with a 94-point season in his third season in the league. I believe Marner's like top 5 or 6 in points per game over the last 3 years in the NHL. Like,
was it his second or third season he put up 90-something points?
It was his third season. He had 94.
Oh my God. So he went to the negotiating table.
He had 67 and 59 and 67 and 55.
So he went to the negotiating table after a 94-point season.
Yeah.
Like shit.
Like it's so like I hear the frustrations from everybody who want a big trade to happen. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, like Kyle Dubas, I still think he does believe in the core that he's put together. And obviously they have proven that right now, they can't perform in the playoffs. Specifically Mitch Marner, who, like I said, has 0 goals in his last 18 playoff games. That quite frankly is unacceptable. But for those, saying that, the Leafs should trade Marner to Buffalo, Marner and a pick to Buffalo for Jack Eichel.
That's the
one. If I'm Buffalo,
yeah.
Are you kidding me? Jack Eichel's like a top 10 player. When Jack Eichel's at his best, he is a top 10 player in this league. He is a 6'2" centerman, over 200 pounds, who skates like the wind and can do everything. And you think Buffalo's just going to get rid of Jack Eichel? Like, come on, everybody.
Yeah, but if you're Buffalo, and like we're going out of left field there. But if you're Buffalo and Eichel wants out, I mean, you're not going to win that. Like, you're not going to win that trade.
Yeah,
so if you get Marner,
you make a good point. Like, right? Jack Eichel, I mean, it's gone to the point now with Buffalo that it seems like he wants to get the hell out of there.
He's gone. Oh,
because it's been a nightmare. So maybe to appease him, and if he is really, really forcing his hand there and says, listen, you better make a damn trade for me because I'm never playing another game for this organization ever again. Maybe that gives the Leafs more leverage in a situation like that. But when I just compare the two players, and also Eichel being a centerman, like, I'm sorry, I'm taking Jack Eichel.
Are you really? So that easily, and I'm not saying no, but that easily you take that deal.
I'm big on Jack Eichel, man. Yeah. And I think
you move Tavares to the wing maybe too. Like,
oh yeah, you bring in.
Look at us, Leafs. This is the most Leafs fan thing ever. Like,
all these idiot Leaf fans think that they're gonna get Jack Eichel and blah blah blah. Yeah, no, I know. I hear.
It's so funny. It's so funny because like Eichel. I've always said, like, sometimes people are just victims of like kind of like the natural look they have on their face or their body language. Like, you get this thing from Michael, like, and argue not, like, there's been some bad moments for the kid, but I feel like the whole American thing, his body language, like, he had a bad rap as soon as he came in the league, and maybe it was a little unfair, and people can judge that all day long because there has been some moments where his ego's really come out. But if Jack Eichel was wearing a Toronto Maple Leafs jersey, hands down, most hated player in the league. Like, hands down, the most attacked. Oh, ego, what an asshole, arrogant. Like, oh my God, it would just come raining. It'd be hilarious, man. I don't know if I can think of a better example.
Oh, Lepore, can you imagine a 1-2 punch at center? Austin Matthews.
This is so Toronto Maple. And then we get McDavid and Gretzky and...
Yeah, get McDavid and that $12.5 million cap hit. I'm sure the Leafs can fit him under their salary.
Yeah,
we'll
do another. They'll retain salary. And we can do this, and
oh man,
we'll give
that is That is so Toronto Maple Leafs fan. It's not
Awesome.
even funny.
Yeah, but fun.
Yeah, no, Lepore. It's going to be very interesting. I mean, whether Kyle Dubas decides to stand pat here with the core that he's assembled, or whether he actually does decide to pull the trigger and pull a Masai Ujiri and trade DeMar DeRozan and try to get a Kawhi Leonard, right?
It's funny how that's come up. And now we're going like everywhere, but everyone's like, oh, like look what the Raptors did. Okay, number one, Marner is a better hockey player, I think, than DeRozan what is basketball player. Like if we did like player power rankings in the NBA and the NHL, I think Marner is a better player, number one. And they got Kawhi Leonard in return. Like what's the equivalent? Like Kawhi Leonard's like top 5 player in the league, maybe. Like if we're gonna get a top 5 player in return, yeah, like that's a no-brainer. Like people are making it like, oh, like even when that deal was made, like Ujiri, we're talking about this now. Like everyone was like, oh, Ujiri took this big risk and all that. I'm like, no, he got a better player.
Yeah, he got Kawhi Leonard.
He got Kawhi Leonard.
Like I know the players in the world.
I know the term was less, so like he made that trade of like, yeah, I have term on DeRozan and I'm trading it for 1 year of Kawhi and I'm going for it. But really, like you knew you weren't winning with DeRozan. At least I have a one-time shot. Like to me, that trade was a no-brainer for the Raptors. But anyway. Raptors fans, comment below. We'll get some Raptors subscribers.
Love it. But yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of different directions the Leafs could go. I mean, I just kind of see them, fixing the fringes of the roster, kind of like what they did in the offseason. And again, you could say, like I mentioned, this core has proven that they can't get it done in the playoffs. So you got to trade somebody to mix it up. But I think we have to pay attention to this situation very closely. Because honestly, Leaf fans, I don't want to disappoint you, but there really is a scenario where none of those big 4 forwards get traded. Yeah. And Dubas knows that this is sort of his last shot. And him and Keefe are just going to run it back with this same core and see if they can do it again. As absolutely insane as that sounds to every Leaf fan right now, let's run it back. Next year's our year. We're going to get it done next year. How long have you been hearing that? Oh, my goodness. I mean, it's
expectations and Leaf morale is definitely at an all-time low right now. Like I said on last week's show, and like I'm not kidding, nothing will get me excited now. Like nothing will get me optimistic in that regard. Like my friends are like, "Are you okay?" I'm getting all these texts. I'm like, I'm just numb. Like I guess is what it is, and I will be that way until both the positive things and negative things until I see a second round matchup. So
yeah, we're all numb to the pain at this point, at least.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. You know what? If we ever want to change the name of our podcast, Numb to the Pain.
I love it.
Is a good one.
That's our backup title. Awesome. But yeah, like I even said this on Twitter, the Leafs could go 82-0 next season and not give up a single goal all season. And no one would give a shit until they win a playoff series. It's literally gotten to that point. Like nothing else matters. Nothing else matters.
Think of this time. Think of this time next year of going into a first round. Hopefully, if we're there again, who knows? But Leafs make the playoffs, even if they are a high seed, whoever they're playing, low seed. The fear.
Oh, people will be terrified.
Oh, people will be terrified.
Imagine Lepore. Imagine they finish third again, like they did.
And get Boston. Oh my God, it's so gonna happen.
Imagine they have to play like Tampa in the first round.
Oh yeah, it's so
Tampa
gonna
or
happen.
Boston. Yeah. Like every Leaf fan is like, no Leaf fan is gonna pick them to win that series.
No, bet your house. Yeah,
that would be a nightmare scenario. At this point, Leaf fans are hoping that they play like Florida in the first round.
Florida's a pretty good team.
I know, and that's what's crazy. Like Florida's legit, right? So it's like, man, oh man, it's almost like no matter who they play in the playoffs, if they make the playoffs next season, every Leaf fan is going to be absolutely horrified.
Yep.
All right, man.
You signed up for it when you were a kid. Welcome to it, guys. Rest of your life, it's fun.
Exactly. All right, everybody. That is going to do it for episode 22 of the Gluttons for Punishment Podcast, or GFP, a Toronto Maple Leafs and NHL podcast, hosted by Michael Lepore and Anthony Bruno. If you enjoyed the show, especially this episode, we would really appreciate it if you go over to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star rating and review. It would help us out so much. And then, of course, if you're watching on YouTube, it would be a big time help if you smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you know exactly when the GFP podcast is posting some new content. Stay tuned for our next episode where we're going to dive even deeper into this and talk about where the Leafs need to go from here, how they can improve heading into next season. So the GFP podcast, we're not going anywhere yet. We're still going to be talking Leafs. So if you like the sound of that, then you should definitely stay tuned. But for Michael Lepore, I'm Anthony Bruno, and we will see you guys in the next one.
Thanks, everyone.